Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven and Dateline Hamden and WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. We're being joined today as we look behind the headlines and the stories that make our community tick by Rabbi Brian Immerman of Michigan, Israel, one of the religious leaders of our community. And we're going to explore what for many of our listeners has become a tale from a long, long time ago, the way we look at the news cycle now with the internet, long before Justice Breyer announced the retirement, long before people worry about the buildup in Ukraine, long before the latest economic news. But it actually wasn't that long ago. January 15th, 2 weeks ago, there was an 11-hour standoff at a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, Congregation Beth Israel, where a Reform rabbi named Charlie Seitchen Walker and 3 other congregants were held hostage for 11 hours by an armed man before they finally escaped. It had everybody in the country paying attention for a few days. But for some of us who attend synagogues and are Jewish, the story hasn't just disappeared with the evanescent news cycle. It's part of an ongoing story about how do we live and pray and congregate in America in 2022. Rabbi Immerman, thank you so much for joining us today. Usually I like to joke around with you and smile, but I know this is a very serious topic, so I just want to thank you for joining us. How you doing?
Oh, thanks for having me. Good. There's a little bit of a delay. Is that on my end?
I'm not sure. I can ask Harry Jost, our station manager, why there's a delay on the other end of the Zoom. But let's see.
I can hear you fine. So
modern technology. So Rob, I mean, what a horrible day that was. It's not the first time or the second or the third time in recent years that there's been an armed attack or an attempted attack on Jewish people at synagogues. You are a Reform rabbi, and
yes,
you are also, I would argue, I'm guessing the generation of the young rabbi there, sort of a young generation, a rabbi who's bringing a lot of energy and goodwill into a congregation. Do you relate to the rabbi who was held hostage that day?
I do, but I think, I don't even know if it's generationally. I think it speaks to rabbis around the world, and here in the U.S. there were outpouring of support from certainly Reform rabbis. It really hit home because I don't know Rabbi Seitchen Walker directly, but I know him through one degree of separation. But any rabbi and any Jew who goes into a synagogue, it's a second home. It's a place that we want to feel safe. We're there to pray. We're there to connect with community, and this was, unfortunately, yet again, another example of anti-Semitism and making us question whether or not we are fully safe.
And I want to get to that a little bit later in the program because it's not a simple question, right? Because in life, you're never completely safe. You have to be realistic about risks and live your life. And we're obviously dealing with that with COVID as it becomes an endemic. And when we walk down the street or get in a car, not to equate all these things, but this is real. So Rabbi Immerman, 2 Saturdays ago when this happened, where were you? When did you first hear about it?
I first heard about it in the early afternoon. I try to take a break from the news on Shabbat on Saturdays, and so I first heard about it as I was preparing. We were doing it was Martin Luther King weekend, so we were preparing a special Havdalah program to talk about Dr. King's legacy.
And so people know, Havdalah is when the Sabbath ends 48 minutes or so after sundown on Saturday night, and then Havdalah is a ceremony to mark the completion of the Sabbath and the transition to the new week. And you were doing a program there about Martin Luther King.
Yes, and as I started preparing for the program, as I turned on my computer, it was actually via Facebook that I saw a bunch of people starting to post about this.
What time of day was it?
For me, it was late afternoon.
Now, that morning, had you led services at Congregation Michigan Israel in Hamden?
We didn't have a morning service that morning, but we did have Torah study.
And was that in person or online?
So it's online right now because of Zoom. But we have resumed. Our main service is Friday night. And I was in the building the night before that. I was actually in the building with 20 different clergy members from around the greater New Haven area.
Oh, for Martin.
Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, First Nations peoples, just everybody, because that's our tradition on Martin Luther King, is to get together with all of these different clergy. And show what it can mean when we can come together. And we had an imam chanting the Quran.
But
Somebody
I'm laughing. But in fact, that's heavy. That the night before this shattering event that touched on tensions among different religious faiths. This was an anti-Semitic event. This was a person who was angry about I guess, an ISIS sympathizer, Al-Qaeda person who was in prison. But here, Congress Mission Israel has a long history of interfaith work. You and your predecessor, Herb Brockman, involved in interfaith groups for social justice. The predecessor before that, Rabbi Goldberg, invited Martin Luther King to Congregation Michigan Israel to speak. You always hold the main, in the Jewish world, the main interfaith Martin Luther King event. So that was Friday night. You're feeling, you're kind of in a good place, right? It's Shabbat. You had this it went well, I take it, the night before?
It fills me up completely. It was an amazing event to see so many people coming together. We had hundreds of people joining us online. And then it just felt like a gut punch the next day to hear that this is happening. And it wasn't just a one and done event. It was unfolding. We were learning new things throughout the day.
So here it is, the afternoon. Your Shabbat is interrupted by finding out this tragedy is unfolding at another Reform synagogue with an interfaith tradition in Texas. What happened the rest of that afternoon, Rabbi Immerman?
Well, fortunately, then we came together as a community. We had 40 community members joining us on Zoom for this program, and at the end, I didn't say it right at the beginning, but at the end of the program, I announced to people what was happening, and many people were hearing it for the first time, and we offered some prayers. There's a prayer called Misha Berach, which is something a lot of people connect to, which is a prayer of healing, which prays for healing of mind, body, and spirit. And I certainly felt that there was some spiritual healing to be done. And then there is a traditional prayer. Anti-Semitism is not new; it goes back thousands of years. And there's a traditional prayer of freeing the captive. And Rabbi Sabbath Beit Halachmi, Rabbi Rachel Sabbath Beit Halachmi had adapted that prayer for this moment, and so we read that prayer together.
So you were partly functioning in your job, right? A tragedy happens, and people look to their rabbi, right? In my synagogue, the rabbi spoke to us, obviously, in the the future days after that, about how he feels this tension between addressing what we're feeling and not allowing these intermittent events to stop us from our game, like what we're focused on, and making it control what we talk about. But, so partly your reaction then was to swing into action as a rabbi. You had an event planned. You were informing people. You were looking at what they needed spiritually by praying. What about what was going through your own head? What were you feeling yourself when you heard about this? And were you doom scrolling? Were you checking back on the phone every half hour? Were you thinking about your own synagogue or what it's like to be in that synagogue? How were you feeling?
That's a great question. I'm fortunate. I'm very close with several of my colleagues, and we started texting each other. We have a text chain. Instead of just nobody knew anything, so I was just looking at CNN. They had a live feed. It was news outlets seemed to be kind of late in reporting, and that was when the FBI said that there's no connection to the Jewish community.
That was an odd statement. Like, I know everybody wants immediately this whole ideological argument, how soon should you call it anti-Semitism, call it terrorism? But there was no doubt from minute one, based on what was in the Facebook, that this was a person who said Jews have all the power, so I deliberately looked for a synagogue to hold people hostage and maybe kill them because only they can free an Islamic person active in a cause. So it is kind of odd how, and then people focus on that, right? A lot of people focus on who's calling it anti-Semitic.
Right. And the FBI walked it back, but it's a deeply ancient anti-Semitic trope that Jews have more control than we actually do. And he eventually wanted to talk to the rabbi Rabbi Buchdahl of Central Synagogue of New York, because he thought that she was perhaps the chief rabbi and could pull these levers, and that's not how Judaism works. But also that's not how the world works. We're not in control like that, obviously. But
what did you think about that part? So, like, any rabbi, I thought about that before we went on the air today. I thought, Brian, the Rabbi was a great guy. Am I doing something not kind to him? To ask him to speak in the media, right? So this other rabbi in New York, because she'd spoken in the media about justice issues, this crazy guy thought for some reason that she therefore had power and could call the president and get this person freed, right? Are you concerned at all speaking out as a public figure?
No, and I have to say, obviously there's a message that I want to bring when I when I say yes to something like this. And two things, the feeling that was going through in my mind is there's a phrase from the Mishnah, a 2,000-year-old sacred text that says, "Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Leze," all of Israel is responsible for one another, and that means that when something bad is happening to any Jew anywhere, we all feel it in our kishkas, right? The sense of peoplehood. And that's really important. But that sense of peoplehood also compels us to engage with kindness, with chesed, with compassion. We're commanded in the Torah to love your neighbor and to love the stranger. And, when I posted just a minute ago this link so that people could join this conversation and see that it was happening. I
And
said,
Patricia Venner said, I saw it on BBC First. Thanks for listening, Patricia.
Well, hello. And, I said, we're here to talk about Colleyville, anti-Semitism, and welcoming the stranger, because the message that there's certainly the secondary trauma, I feel, but Rabbi Citron Walker even said in his interviews, I would welcome another person in and give them a cup of tea.
Yes.
And I'm not going to be scared by people who are anti-Semitic to scare me away from doing that right thing, from welcoming the stranger. And that's I think the biggest takeaway is that I cannot be scared into not doing the right thing. And you talked at the beginning, the phrase risk tolerance is how we figure out what to do vis-a-vis COVID, and that's how we figure out how to do anything. We're always taking
ride a bike, bring our kids to school, go to a movie, right? Yeah. And we're talking to Rabbi Brian Immerman of Congregation Michigan Israel, who had, like some others of us, has not forgotten that just less than 2 weeks ago, our man, held 4 people hostage at a Reform synagogue in Texas. And what do we think about that? I know that every incident like this has its own drama, its own personality, its own story. This one was particularly compelling to me, the details of it, because you had this rabbi who's known for interfaith work, who at a time when we're all supposed to be scared of each other for every reason about everything, this disheveled stranger comes to his door during a Saturday morning service. He lets him in. The guy thought he needed something to eat. He gave him tea. He was kind to him. The guy turns around, has a gun, and says, I'm going to hold you guys hostage. Might kill you. The guy obviously liked the rabbi, from what we could tell from the live stream and things he said later. He responded to the kindness. He was also mentally ill, clearly, and up to something, so that over the 11 hours, this rabbi had to deal with it. What did you think about that part of the story? You said would you also do the same thing the rabbi did? Would you because you must have security arrangements at your shul. Can anyone just walk in, or?
Sadly, when I start, so for those of you who don't know, I've only been at Michigan Israel for 3.5 years. It's a long time.
It's only because at Michigan Israel, the rabbis stay a long time. Herb Brockman is, I think, over 30 years, is one of the great leaders of our community. Yeah.
And we're celebrating our 180th year as a congregation. It's an incredible honor to be called one of the spiritual leaders of this particular congregation. And when I started, we had doors open all the time. And then when the tragedy happened at Eitz Chaim, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, we said we have to lock our doors.
Yeah, that was sad. Yeah.
And then when things happened in Pondway, and as we continued to develop our practices, we decided that we felt the need to have an armed security guard whenever we have a public event or services. And so that's what we have now, and we're continuing to talk with them. We're always in conversation with the Anti-Defamation League, the Secure Communities Network. We had already had our new representative to the Jewish community here in New Haven come in, and we're talking to the Hamden PD and the FBI on a very
And I
regular
will say,
basis.
in all these issues, we do feel very much part of America now. I know we do. I go to daily service often in my synagogue in Westville, and there are police officers who park in the back and just make sure things are okay to do their paperwork. Patricia also says Rabbi Immerman fits so well at CMI. But these are tough questions. I have to admit that we don't all agree at our synagogue about having an armed person closing and locking the door and having to be buzzed in. Some of us feel that yes, it's horrible if a horrible event happens at your synagogue. It's real. It happens. And there's such a tiny chance at your place that something's lost by having closed doors. But I guess in Colleyville, they did have closed doors, but they also let the person in. That's a tough question, huh?
I don't think I don't think it's a tough question, because I'm a statistics guy as much as the emotional spiritual, and the chances of this happening are infinitesimally low
Right.
in any particular moment. Nonetheless, we react, right? We
Right.
react, we plan, we do our best, and then we've decided that we need to keep our doors locked. Other congregations don't make that same decision, and
I
we
think most
also
do now. I think that there's been a trend now that they're like, we just in the last few months, have it locked all the time. Yeah.
oh wow, and I think to the lost my train of thought for a second.
It's okay. Patricia points out that neighbors in general like you to have a safety plan. They all do have security plans. So one thing about this rabbi in Texas was that he had gone through training. So on the one hand, he was trained as a rabbi to have an open heart and welcome the stranger, which he did. And I would argue might have helped save some lives because of the human connection he had there. And he also had training from the Anti-Defamation League and others about how to handle a situation like this. So he really knew what to do. Keep the person talking. When it looked like things 11 hours later were going south and the guy was about to shoot up, which is the same conclusion the FBI came to. So he didn't make this up, right? That the guy was getting more aggressive. We haven't yet heard those tapes. At that point, when he found the moment, he threw the chair at the guy and everybody ran out. Have you had training like that too?
Not like that, and it's been some time. So I have to say that moment when I read that in the New York Times on Sunday night, I couldn't even bring myself to say those words out loud to my wife, that he escaped. From the moment we heard that they were free and everybody was safe,
Yeah, that
to
was
the moment
really.
that I learned that he had escaped, I felt a sense of relief. Like, there are people who are going to protect me. When I learned that he escaped, that was a completely different calculus.
Yeah.
Right? That there are moments in which I need to, we need to rely on our own. And the fact that, we have to, I said the next week at services, I said, did any of the other clergy who were there that night before, how did they now feel less safe being there? Did they, do other communities need to go through the same sort of security training on a regular basis?
Well,
Fortunately,
did you have anyone there from the George Street Masjid? Is that where because there's a Islamic community there that for decades have dealt with the crime in the neighborhood. It's not anti-Semitic, it's not anti-Islamic crime, but they actually had a mosque patrol with armed at one point because of all the crime there. So I guess they're kind of different security concerns for different communities. Yeah.
Right, everybody. And we actually already had we have a security training that we had already scheduled that's coming up for our nursery school faculty through the same agency that trained the rabbi down there. And of course, within the week, we got another one on the books for our professional staff.
Will this incident itself have any day-to-day impact or week-to-week impact on you and your congregation? Will it change the discussion all in this country? Or is this just another step with Squirrel Hill and Tree of Life attack in 2018, the Poway attack in San Diego? Is there anything different about this, Rabbi Immerman?
Something feels different. It's hard to articulate.
Well, I'll tell you what feels different is the story. As you said, they weren't protected. They escaped. It was heroic. And, the story is different every time. I'm just wondering if the ongoing impact on a community changes, which I'm not sure it does with each one. Tree of Life was a massacre. I mean, that was a much different kind of thing.
Right. For some reason, given the anti-Semitic tropes that were happening here, right? Jews have the power to do this, right? why not have walked into a courthouse or
Right.
have found the right person who actually has the power? And that, what I think is, it's been lifting up for me, and I think some of my colleagues who I've been in dialogue with, is that this anti-Semitism is so real, and it's nefarious, and it's happening from so many different angles right now. I know it's
Yeah.
affecting teens in a horrible way, and it's not just far right. It's people on the far right. And I said in my sermon, we expect anti-Semitism from white supremacists, but the sometimes more difficult is when it's coming from
Well, the rooms that you and I are in, it comes from the
right.
left,
Yeah,
and it's been coming left for quite a long time.
yeah, and it feel lets us feel squished. And what the conclusion that I've been coming to is Jews are not going to solve anti-Semitism.
Right.
We've been living with it and dealing with it for millennia. We need everybody else to stand up and say anti-Semitism is really real and prevalent, and we have to address it as a nation.
And I guess because people didn't die, and this understands human nature. So Tree of Life Synagogue, 2018, when the Jews were mowed down there, our community spoke up as they did everywhere else. We had a big interfaith service at the JCC, Jewish Community Center. We had people of all races, religions there. There was none of that here, and there's one person in my synagogue who felt bad that she wasn't getting the support on Facebook because she thought that was anti-Semitic, where I actually thought, no, I think that people did care a lot when we were killed. And this story, was so red hot for a news cycle or two. It was on, CBS Morning News, had the rabbi on Monday. But then it was gone, right? So Tree of Life, because this massacre went on for a year. There's a great book out by Mark Oppenheimer about how the community dealt with it after. So that's why I was wondering how it does feel different. I agree with you, but I'm not sure how it does. It doesn't change how we live and how we pray and how we gather, unless it's just one more piece of support for the groups within our synagogue communities that say we have to have more and more security and more wariness of the outsider. And I guess, would you agree that that's the challenge? Because when I hear you, that's what I hear. And when I heard the rabbi there, the challenge is never to lose our commitment to welcoming the outsider while we redouble our commitment to protect ourselves. Would you agree that that's a challenge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and I think a lot of people lifted up. Where was everybody else supporting? And a lot of the conclusion is coming to the fact that nobody died, so they didn't necessarily feel the support was needed. I definitely received some support. As this was happening, I'll call out Omer Bajwa, the Muslim chaplain at Yale, sent me, and I know Rabbi Brockman, a text saying, "Hey, thinking about you. Are you okay?" I know the imam who had been participating with us from the Peace Islands Institute in Waterbury reached out, and then people started reaching out via the email chain that we had organized the service on, checking in. So, part of it is those relationships. There's a book that I'm making my way through. I haven't finished it yet, but Dara Horn, if you saw it,
They love us when we're dead. Yeah, they love dead Jews.
Yeah, people love dead Jews, and it's
I thought
the
it was
premise
brilliant.
is that people focus. When they want to write about the story of the person who's no longer there, they don't want to actually get into the fact that anti-Semitism is real and alive, and learn about the culture and why we do certain things. And her example is Anne Frank. This book that's been published in hundreds of millions of people around the entire world have read it in 39 languages or something. And yet she said, how come this other guy's book that tells of the actual horrors of the Holocaust isn't printed?
Or how there wasn't popular support from the majority in America for intervening to protect Jews in the Holocaust. But after we're dead, everyone wants to rush to say how bad they felt that we were killed. But then when there's an assertion of Jews after the war having larger roles in our economy and our society, they were still blocked. I mean, I would argue that that's how that plays out.
Yeah.
But Rabbi Brian Immerman, Congregation, Michigan, Israel. So something else that really interested me that hasn't been spoken about much about what happened in Colleyville, Texas, at Congregation Beth Israel. So this rabbi, I would argue, was universally hailed as a hero. And I certainly think he was a hero. What a human being. He acted swiftly, intelligently, when the moment called for it to stage the escape, but also patiently and intelligently protected life and dealt with the potential attacker as a human being. He did not have his contract renewed at his synagogue. that, I mean, I don't know if this is the case, right? But that the congregation in northern Texas has made a Trumpist turn, right? And the congregation felt they didn't like his approach. What's that all about?
So I can't speak to it. I don't know what the details are. A shidduch between a community and their rabbi it's an important conversation. I don't really know why it happened. I know it got reported pretty quickly afterward, which kind of left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
They thought it shouldn't have been reported. Don't you think that was kind of? I mean, I've got my journals out here. I can't imagine how.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it wasn't reported more. This heroic rabbi was heroic because of carrying out the most nuanced and highest ideals of our tradition, and was doing that as his mission ongoing in this community where the congregation's politics has turned right in a symbol of what's happening in our country. I think that's a fascinating and important story.
So I think that the story that I latch onto is that the Jewish community in America is not monolithic, and it's not all liberal.
And no community is.
Right. But sometimes, we're small enough that it's easy to use the broad strokes, which fuels anti-Semitism, right? But to understand, especially for listeners, that the Jewish community is not monolithic. So traditionally, for 100 years, we voted 80% or whatever it is, not 80 years, 80% Democrat, 20% Republican, and those numbers haven't changed much. But like every other aspect of American life, we've become more and more polarized.
Right. It's the Orthodox who tend a lot more right, and it's still the Reform and Conservative and non-affiliated and Reconstructionist Jews who vote almost as high as African Americans for Democratic presidential candidates. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I'm privileged that I get to really sometimes connect Jewish values to modern political ideals here in Mishkan, Israel. And what I've seen, so I've now been in the rabbinate for 10 years. And when I started, and I would give a sermon many years ago when I was in Denver about racial justice, and many people wrote to me that they were agreed by what I wrote. And I said, thank you for reaching out. Let's meet. And I met with all of them, and we heard each other. It was built relationships. Did they have to agree with me? No. That's what's the beauty of Judaism, right? We argue and argue and argue. Mm-hmm. Now what I see is that when people don't agree with what I say, with what Rabbi Brockman said near the end of his tenure, they say, all right, well, we're going to go find the congregation and the rabbi that says we want to believe.
And Rabbi Goldberg had that controversy when he embraced Martin Luther King back in the day. People kind of leave that part out of history. It works
and
both
Stokely
ways.
Carmichael. Right.
Excuse me?
Stokely Carmichael also spoke here.
Oh, really? Okay, that idea.
They wouldn't even let him on the bima where we
really
do the prayers. He had to speak on the stage.
Why?
Because they thought that he was too controversial.
Boy, that's interesting.
So there's so these political tensions exist. I think what I see changing is that it's like everywhere else in our world, we say, all right, I don't like what you said on Facebook. I'm not going to ever talk to you again. Or my brother voted for Trump and I voted for Biden. We're never going to talk again. And that's we cannot let that seep into the Jewish community as well.
I agree with you. I'll tell you how I feel as a person. So I'm at one of those shuls where most of the people vote Democratic, but not everyone, and there are conservatives present. And I always prefer that not that we shouldn't talk about difficult questions, but it's very important to me that someone who doesn't agree with the liberal orthodoxy or majority opinion feel comfortable in a synagogue and embraced and loved and not judged for the political view, and feel like you can come there in the same spirit of common shared values and purpose and humanity. So yeah, I kind of would like to see shuls be more of a politics-free zone. Although it's true that as a rabbi, you are called on to address the issues of the day. So that's a tough one. Rabbi Goldberg preached a lot about Richard Nixon back in the day. I know someone who studied the bat mitzvah. She said she learned the bat mitzvah portion, but she learned a lot more about Richard Nixon. That's a tough one. How do you deal with that one? How do you carry out your goal there?
I once read that somebody took an excerpt from the biography of a pastor that said that their goal every Sunday was that people come in and to say, you are loved and you're doing a great job, but that they forget during the week, so then they come back on Sunday to hear that message. And so, first of all, I always want people to know that they're loved, that they're doing a great job if you're doing your best. I think it's also important in the Reform movement really tries to follow the prophetic tradition a little bit. to remind people that it's not good enough to just be. You have to follow your values. And I think fear causes us to compromise our values. But, in the next 2 weeks, we, along with your congregation, Becky, and 4 other congregations here in Greater New Haven, are going to be welcoming an Afghan refugee family. It's part of JCAR, the Jewish Community Area Refugee Response. And this is going to be the 7th family that they've resettled. And we have not resettled a Jewish family. They've been mostly Muslim families from Syria and Iraq and now Afghanistan. And so let's figure out how we get together around love, right? Let's find our shared commonalities. We all agree that everybody should love each other in this world. We all agree that people should have basic rights. We all agree that children should be free of oppression and have food in their stomachs and get a good education. So let's start with our commonalities. Let's acknowledge that we're all working to do our best. And then let's figure out how to chart a path forward that's filled with love and compassion.
Amen. Rabbi Brian Immerman, no better way to close it than that. I'm just always so pleased that you came to our area. You pulled off what I consider an amazing feat, which is to follow a beloved spiritual leader in a congregation who'd been there a long time and not get booted the first year. You're here 3.5 years later and going strong, and I think that's a great testament to you.
He's still a great mentor.
Yeah, he and you and your congregation get credit for that. But anyway, thanks so much, Rabbi Immerman, for really enlightening us and helping us see the humanity amid all the fractious debates we're having after incidents like this.
We'll never stop giving tea.
All right. Never stop giving tea. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks to Rabbi Brian Immerman in Michigan, Israel. Thanks to Harry Droz, who's connecting us in 3 dimensions here. And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic experience of a regular visitor to Michigan, Israel, especially this time of year, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.